He said nobody cares about you until the crowd chanted my name, he said in a boardroom full of cameras and polished smiles. Nobody cares about you. It was meant to silence her, the words thin as glass and sharp as a tailor's needle. They landed in the room like a verdict, echoing off marble, and for a moment everyone did what people do when power speaks. They nodded, they smiled, they did not reach for the other person's hand. Her name was Mina. She had grown up learning how to fold herself small, then teaching herself to stand. She treated design like prayer late nights at sewing machines, fabrics folded like promises, sketches that felt like private letters to the future. She believed in clothes that made people brave. She had talent, but talent in her world was a patient thing. It waited, stitched quietly, hoping someone would notice before the thread wore thin. He was Sang-wook, a man who wore influence the way others wore scarves. The industry loved him because he had an instinct for spectacle. He could turn chiffon into headlines and obscurity into roster spots. He had the charm of a man who knew the weight his name carried, and he used it like currency. They had been close once. In another life, they had been intimate and messy and vulnerable. But time, ambition, and a private cruelty had hardened him. When he spoke of Mina that afternoon, it was to puncture something honest inside her. "Nobody cares about you," he repeated, carelessly, as if he were describing a weather pattern. The room laughed politely. Mina's throat closed. A camera's red eye blinked. A PR manager clicked a pen like a metronome. What hurt was not the words. It was the certainty in his voice that made the words stick. After the meeting, Mina walked out into a late autumn sunset that made every building look like glass caught on fire. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt oddly unmoored, like a dress caught on a hook and torn at the seam. She stood under the shelter of a cafe awning while the city moved through her stylists, hustling, models rehearsing steps, drivers arguing, overcap. The world she loved had a brutal facet that day. It could measure people in moments and file them away. She did what she always did. She worked. The studio was small, above a dry cleaner and a bookstore, a place where the heater clanked and the kettle whistled with its honest steam. She sketched late into the night. Each line was a small resistance to the idea that someone else's opinion could define her worth. Word traveled faster than a rumor ought to. A clip of Sang-wook's remark trimmed, sharp, and ready for the scroll. For a week, it became a tiny, painful echo on feeds. Nobody cares about you, looped for clicks. People sent her messages, some with sympathy, most with the ennui of scrolling. Mina read them in the dark and felt the room in her chest shrink. People who mattered, didn't they seem to carry? Strangers spouted empathy with the speed of a like. But Mina also had people who stayed. There was Ji-ho, an assistant she had hired months earlier, good seamster with quiet hands and better jokes. There was Asha, an intern with a laugh, like a bell, who had brought her a packet of thread when she thought her work would dissolve. And there was the old woman downstairs who owned the bakery and always left a warm bone on Mina's table when she worked late. Their small constellations helped her breathe. She began to build a plan not to ruin him, but to offer a counter-narrative. Power, she thought, could be answered by presence. She would not shrink. She would create a night where people had to choose whose voice they believed. The opportunity arrived wrapped in scandal. Sang-wook's agency announced a new Showcase-san open casting, major press, a stage that would host 100 brands under his umbrella. The industry would be watching. Mina had no connections to the roster. Her name was Sante, on any rolls of favorite designers. She had one thing, an earnest collection of dresses that made people move like they owned their choices. She submitted her application like a small defiance. The platform required a sample look, a mood board, a short statement. She did not craft a PR-friendly manifesto. She wrote simply, "I make clothes for people trying to be kinder to themselves." The submission vanished into the stream of talent that the agency sifted daily. Weeks later, a reply came, not the official, polished acceptance that the roster enjoyed, no email with a logo and gentle diction. It was a curt text. "You're in. Backstage. Final is Lodge." Mina stared at her phone and let out a laugh that had equal parts triumph and dismay. She thought of the irony the same house that recorded his words would be the stage where her answer took shape. The night of the showcase, the city glittered like controlled chaos. The venue was a warehouse turned cathedral of light, seamless white runway, photographers lined like constellations, the hush of anticipation that tastes like stack. Models floated in silk, sequins, structured coats that made knees knock and jaws drop. Mina's collection was lost. It had to be lost. The final look was a kind of secular prayer. When fashion buries a story at the end, the audience must choose to stay or leave. Backstage, she paced between racks, fingers threading through fabric knot, with panic but ritual. The team of unpaid volunteers she'd pulled together moved with fidelity. Jiho adjusting hems, Asha pressing collars, the bakery woman putting small buns into stabilizing pockets like talismans. The dresses smelled faintly of starch and lavender, and in the quiet, Mina whispered to them like old friends, "Carry me well." Sang-wook arrived in a tide of black suits and private laughter. He watched from the wings, a man who had the power to decide whether the room would applaud or chisel a new narrative of indifference. Their eyes met a flash, a recognition of history, but she did not look away. She had trained herself not to. Her first look walked. Applause, Hosey measured and polite. Her designs were not the loud geometry of the night. They were the hush after an argument, the tender reply. Each model moved with an ease that made the clothes look like choices, not constraints. The crowd adjusted their posture. Slowly, the rhythm of the room shifted into something softer. When her final look stepped onto the runway, a dress with a simple neckline, clean lines, pockets that many would not notice, the silence that fell was not a lack of sound, but an intake of breath. Mina watched from the wings as the camera found the dress, as strangers leaned closer, as someone in the front row pressed a palm to her chest like a benediction. The model moved with a dignity that made the light seem more human. Then the unexpected happened. A group of attendants had prepared a stunt. Not Mina's request, but the kind of spontaneous celebration that sometimes catches on. Someone began to clap, then another, then more. It started low, near the press pit, and like the beginning of a beat in a song, it rose. The rhythm traveled like contagion. People found themselves clapping for the dress's quietness, for the courage of a designer staking truth to a runway. Sang-wook watched, his jaw alive. He could have cued a staff member to halt the applause, to redirect chatter to a prearranged spectacle. But he did not. He stood, a man with 1,000 curated moves, and he watched something he had not expected. The room turning towards someone who had been told nobody cared. Outside the theater, the clip that would change the night's trajectory already began to form. Phones recorded the moment the crowd refused to let the runway end. A video showing Han's young, old-fashioned editors, students clapping with sincere insistence, found its way online within minutes. It crossed platforms in the time it takes to breathe. Comments arrived like small hammers. Finally, real applause. She did something different. Who is she? Mina went off the runway in a fade of lights and came back to the backstage to find a bubble of people. Her team was overwhelmed. A stylist had tears on her cheeks. She felt disoriented, the way a child feels after someone claps for a song they didn't expect to end well. Then someone whispered, as if the room itself had rearranged sentences. The crowds chanting her name. At first, she thought it was rumor. Then she heard it low, then swelling. Mina, Mina, Mina. Sangwook was in the crowd, and for a second his expression read like a shutter closing. He had seen a woman he'd dismissed become a name that rolled off tongues like a new melody. His voice had given the room permission to ignore her. Now, the room had chosen otherwise. The chant continued beyond the runway and into the fields. When the clip hit a major platform, the chant became a headliner, democratic chorus that did what festivals and critics and contracts could not. It insisted on attention, made attention an act of kindness. Mina stepped out again because people needed faces to attach to the chant. She walked slowly because speed would have been arrogance, and she did not want to trade one currency for another. Her hands trembled not from fear, but because what she had built was finally recognized by a public that could still surprise her. Outside the bright dome over the venue, her phone buzzed until it warmed her palm. Messages poured in. Beers who had never noticed her, stylists who wanted to collaborate, strangers writing how a dress made them feel safer in public spaces. The name that Sangwook had once used to dismiss her now vibrated in the world with new gravity. There was a rehearsal of Aftermath. Interviews requested, editors asking for a lookbook, a talk show host asking her to speak about the crowd moment. Mina did not run to the cameras. She sat with Jiho on a low step, ate a bun warmed by the bakery woman's hands, and let the world turn without demanding she'll catch it. Sangwook's reaction was not immediate revenge. He existed in patterns, first surprise, then inspection, then a performance of this. He arranged meetings with PR, with investors, with people who had the habit of elevating him rather than the practice of listening. The industry expects a narrative for every surprise acquisitions, mentorships, deals that smooth wrinkles of anxiety. When a woman rises through public whim, power prefers structural explanations, not magical contagion. He sought to reclaim the plot by offering her a seat at his Teblan interview. A collaboration, an ambiguous handshake, dressed in the language of inclusion. She remembered the words again. Nobody cares about you, and felt a steely clarity that was not about revenge, but about response. She could accept the handshake and the staged coziness, or she could refuse, not to punish, but to preserve the geometry of what had happened, public will calling her forward, not anointed access. She chose neither at first. She chose to stay present. In meetings, she listened more than she spoke. She signed one or two small partnerships that felt a Nesta charity collaboration that would fund scholarships for young designers from marginalized neighborhoods, a capsule line for a boutique that promised fair wages. She was not interested in the hyperbolic applause that comes with brand endorsements. She was curious about structures that kept the work going. Sangwook watched her choices like a man who had a new instrument to analyze. He offered a big contract, a permanent collection, runway placement, resources without strings attached, or so the press release would say. The offer came wrapped in language that sounded generous. But Mina had seen how contracts creased the soul. She wanted autonomy, not patronage, that felt like death. She stood at the edge of power and took the measure of what she wanted. A studio that could support apprentices, a line that paid seamsters fair living wages, and designs that allowed people to step into their lives with more courage. She wanted a community that practiced care. She wanted to build with people who had been the ground under her feet. In the winter that followed, she opened a small workshop that looked like a chapel for makers. Sunlight through industrial windows, long tables, pressing irons, cups of tea that warmed the hands. Those who had clapped for her taught there. Those who had not yet learned, too, were invited. It was a space where the crowd that had chanted her name transformed into a steady network. Her name stopped being a headline and became an action. Sangwook returned, not as an antagonist on a marquee, but as a man who had been part of a system that could both uplift and silence. He came to the workshop with apologies worn like old gloves. He did not try to buy her loyalty. He offered mentorship for the apprentices' funds to expand the scholarship program, and a frankness that looked like repentance. Mina listened. She accepted the funds, but framed them under terms that honored the people who would benefit. She asked him to vocalize the commitment publicly in a way that had no strings, an apology and a pledge to reform practices. At his agency, the plea was more than transactional. Mina asked for tangible changes, transparency in hiring, a training fund, a public forum where complaints could be aired without fear. He agreed, as public men do, and then he worked shifting his team, altering contracts, stepping into meetings he had once sent deputies to. People watched carefully, suspicious and hopeful in equal measure. It wasn't a fairy tale where forgiveness erased everything. There were consequences to the system he had supported, and there were people who chose not to forgive. But in that season, the industry watched a different kind of spectacle. The slow work of repair. Mina watched too, careful, cautious, and quietly brave. At the first public event, where he stood by her side to announce the scholarship 1 year later, he introduced her not as someone his name had elevated, but as an equal, who had found a way to translate public momentum into sustainable change. He did not attempt to reframe the earlier humiliation. He simply said, "I spoke words I regretted. I did not measure the consequences properly. Mina has shown me that voices, especially those we underestimate, are the architects of better futures." The crowd's reaction in that hall was different. The chant that lifted months before was now a steady applause, deeper because it had duration. People had been part of something that began as viral and matured into structural support. Mina watched the faces in the room, the apprentices whose lives the fund would touch. The seamstresses who had helped construct her garments and felt a kind of careful joy that was not triumphant but full. After the speech, when Mina stepped to the microphone, she spoke not for revenge but for repair. She thanked the crowd because they had given her a chance to be seen. She thanked the apprentices, the volunteers, the bakery woman who always left buns in the studio. She thanked Sangwook in the way one thanks someone who had taught you what not to be. When she left the stage, the chant rose again, not like a thunderclap, but like the steady rhythm of people who had learned to choose generosity over dismissal. Mina, Mina, Mina. It was a chant that had changed its meaning. Once it had been viral impulse. Now it carried the weight of consequence. Mina breathed in the city that night, the neon soft by snow, the sound of traffic like distant percussion. She had once believed that applause was a currency. She had learned that applause could be a beginning, not an end. The crowd's chant had shown her that visibility could translate into responsibility. She walked with Jiho through quiet streets, their shadows long and warm, and thought of the children who would enter the scholarship door the next morning with the bright terror of possibility. He had said, Once, nobody cares about you. The phrase had been an attempt to define her in a whisper. The crowd had answered not with a shout of vengeance, but with a cadence that changed the city's conversation. People cared not because he told them to, but because they decided together to care. Her voiceover and soft, clear like a bell for a new hour. Power can say, "We're nothing." The crowd can choose otherwise. And when they do, they hand you back the chance to become the person you always wanted to be.